Well, welcome back to the Pastors on Porn podcast. And yes, it has been a considerable amount of time since I've done the last podcast. Most of my summer efforts have been working on the twin podcast, which is Finding Traction. And that really is a podcast that is just more for some of the regular challenges that we all face in terms of overcoming our struggles with porn. And so there's a whole bunch of new episodes on the Finding Traction podcast. I think I'm up to 70 now. And this one's only in the 60s, I think. So I figured, I had a couple ideas that specifically related to the purpose of this podcast. This podcast is for people who are in, pastoral positions, ministry positions, nonprofits, and just being in those kind of positions of trust, those positions, maybe you're in the church world, a nonprofit world, but there really is an added pressure. There's an added sense of difficulty in terms of you're supposed to be a person above all disrepute. And so when you find yourself struggling with unwanted sexual behaviors, it puts you in a real pickle. And that is why I did this podcast, to help people who are struggling, who are in, let's say, a pastoral role or another example, and they're just trying to navigate through just what feels like an internal war, or they're just in a place where they're going, man, I don't know who to turn to. I need a safe place to talk to. I got to ask questions around, should I continue in ministry? Who should I tell? Where can I get a safe place for some support? So this podcast really is a doorway into those sorts of questions. Most of the topics, certainly in the latter part of the episodes in this one, have really related to topics that really are with that environment in mind. The unique challenges around pastoral work, let's say, and what happens when you find your inner life not matching your outer life. And so that is why we started the podcast. And one of the other things that we do is I've had a number of groups and still have groups where we have pastors that get together. It's a safe place. It's a Zoom space. And guys from all over the UK, North America. I've had guys from Australia and pastors that get together. And we simply walk through some of the Finding Traction material in a safe space. We learn to be honest about our struggles, honest to ourselves, and then learning to be honest with somebody else. And it really is sometimes the first space where some of these people have been able to come out from under a cloud of shame. The shame when you're struggling with something like porn, for example, and you're the head of an organization, you're a pastor, you're a youth pastor, you're what, and it only seems to add to the shame, to make it worse, and it only seems to make the temptation for secrecy all the higher. So again, if you want more information on where to turn, I'd love you to go to the website. It's just bandofbrothers.care, C-A-R-E. And that's the website. And to get a hold of me, it's bandofbrothers.care @gmail.com. So I want to talk today about a specific situation that came out of probably one of the most classic books ever written around, it was really one of the first books written around the topic of addictions, around trying to take a spiritual approach to studying addictions. And the late author was a doctor. His name was Gerald May. And it really is one of the classics. It's called Addictions and Grace. And in that book, of course, a good author always defines his terms. And so, he talks about what he qualifies as an addiction. Now, I recognize that for example, things like porn are not in the formal DSM in terms of considered addictions by a psychiatrist or psychologist. But this is, so what he did is he instead talked about the experience of addictions. Somebody said to me recently, he says, I don't really like the term addictions, but I know the experience of addiction. And I prefer to talk about the experience of addiction rather than the identity of being addicted. And so he liked to use and talk around, the experience rather than taking on the identity of being addicted. And all of that said is I like the practical approach that Gerald May takes. And he talks about 5 elements that he qualifies as an addiction. The first one was self-deception. And that really is spelling out the fact that probably the biggest lie that we tell in this whole process is the lie we tell to ourselves. And in lesson 1 of the Finding Traction course, I outline about 12 of those lies or ways that we lie to ourselves around, the classic word denial. So self-deception is the first one. The second one he describes is tolerance. And with tolerance, what he's getting at there is somewhere a sense that our previous activities no longer provide the same release or the same excitement, the same thrill. And somewhere endemic in the process is an escalation that begins to happen, whether it's of time involved or risque behavior or whatever it is. There is a tolerance that develops, which then in itself leads to a degree of escalation. So number 2 is tolerance. Number 3 is withdrawal symptoms. Now, if, for example, if I don't have my morning coffee by about 11 o'clock, I'm hurting and I am not a very happy person. That's a very clear example of a caffeine withdrawal that my body, or a caffeine need that my body has become accustomed to. At this point, I don't have a podcast for that. I prefer to live in total denial, so let's not go there. But withdrawal. Just this morning, I had a pastor talk to me, and he says, I think I'm experiencing some sort of discomfort, some sort of withdrawal as I've been stepping away from my favorite private sexual behaviors. And he says, is that what could be going on? Is that why I feel off? And I said, absolutely. Whether it's a brain science thing where your brain has become used to a certain rush of chemicals, but there is a sense of discomfort and withdrawal that when you cease doing those activities, you feel it, you know it. And he would say that's the third aspect of something that has taken an addictive place in your life. When you pull away from it, you notice it, you feel it. That's number 3. Number 4 is, of course, powerlessness. I am completely, when it comes to drinking alcohol, for example, I have complete power and control over it because it's never really taken a place of capturing my will in my life. Of course, there's verses, in Proverbs, or Psalms where it talks about, our sins take us captive. They hold our will hostage. They kidnap our will. And most of us would say there is a powerlessness, an unmanageability in particular areas. Sometimes I've had, for example, women say to me when they find out, what I do, they'll say things like, well, why don't they just stop? That's just wrong. That's hurting people. Like what's the problem? Why does this need all the work you're doing? They should just stop doing that. I think to myself, well, they can't. I mean, theoretically they can, but practically and experientially, it's like their will has been so weakened over the years that they are like the 90-pound weakling, and the rock comes down the beach and starts throwing sand in their face, and they put their little flailing arms out and try to slap the rock, and he just, pushes them away and like that's how it feels experientially. There is a sense of powerlessness, unmanageability. And again, I'm very much in control of many areas that I don't struggle with. Sometimes I don't usually say this to people on the outside, but I'm convinced that every one of us has something which feels like a thorn in the flesh, something which brings us to a place of powerlessness. I think God will often use those things to say, my grace is sufficient for you in your weakness. So I think that's the experience of somebody who feels that something has power over them. So let's go back over the four, and I'll get to the fifth one. The four is, number one is self-deception, lying to ourselves. Number two is tolerance, that introduces some form of escalation. Number three is a withdrawal component, where we experience discomfort as we walk away from that. Number four is a powerlessness or unmanageability. And number five, which is really where I want to focus today on, is, he said, was a distortion. There is some sort of a distortion. Now, he called it a distortion of attention. And I want to get into that because I think that, for example, if you have developed a lifestyle or an embedded habit of viewing porn, for example, I think that there is a number of ways that our attention or our lives become distorted. Now, let's just talk, distortions in general. Some distortions are almost comical. I was just at the P&E in Vancouver recently, and like most carnivals, I assume, they have these places where you go and where all of these mirrors distort your image. They distort your reality. So the result is you see things different than what they really are. Apparently, my son was telling me in Asia, with the dating programs now, there's all sorts of programs that you can use when you put your name and your image or your video out that make you look younger, thinner, more hair, more attractive, higher cheekbones, all sorts of video programs that you can upscale your look, so that when you're looking in that dating social Darwinism world, you can give yourself a bit of a boost. I've heard also of pastors doing similar things with their online presence, with their online image or recorded image, and I even want to go there. But those are almost comical, but I want to get to certain distortions that I think are far more insidious. For example, now, again, Gerald May uses the phrase distortion of attention. And where I think he's going with that is this. He's talking about how our life with porn becomes a bigger and bigger part of the landscape in our attention. We spend more time thinking about it, whether trying to deal with the regret of our last episode, or we spend time trying to resist its pull or its urges, or we spend time our mind wanting to go back and replay those last videos or scenes that we remember. It's often maybe the last thing we think about when we go to sleep, or the first thing we're thinking about in the morning. Or maybe it is something where those urges are leading to a degree of anticipation for maybe the next time we can return to that playground. The bottom line is it's just a huge part of our internal landscape. It distorts our attention. It presses into every crack and crevice in our mind. I would say without a doubt that one of my biggest regrets from years of struggling with porn, even as a pastor, has been how much mental energy that porn robbed me of over the years. Energy that could have been spent pursuing things that were more life-giving. So I think there's a distortion in that sense, a distortion of our intention, a distortion of our focus. But there's another example of distortions, and I want to do a couple more. Another example of distortions that I think place is it begins to distort how we experience real world relationships. Of course, it will over time develop we will develop a distorted view of women. As one pastor told me, I immediately rank everybody as on a 1 to 10 scale, porn worthy or not. Well, he used a lot more crass words than that, but you get the idea. I'll leave it at that. Basically, every woman I meet, I immediately put on a scale. Andrew Bowman, his book, The Sexually Healthy Man, it's a great collection of little essays. He calls this a porn style of relating. And that is like almost a set of contact lenses that go over our eyes that really skew every woman as someone who is either worthy or not worthy of our sexual interests. So that's another form of distortion which can settle in. Now, there's another sort of distortion. I want to end on this and in one sense focus on this one, which I think is especially problematic for those of us who are working in a ministry. Recently, a friend of mine, a young seminary student, a guy that I'm coaching, he wrote a paper and he asked this question. It was a really provocative question. This was the question: is there a link between regular and sustained porn use and pastoral misconduct? Let me say that again. Is there a link between regular and sustained porn use and pastoral misconduct? Now, to be clear, his paper doesn't say there is a direct causal link, right? There's way too many factors and variables and things in place in people's environment and context. But what he's saying is there a series of breadcrumbs from porn that could very easily and often lead people in the direction of pastoral misconduct, and I think his conclusion was, from his research in the paper, was yes, there is that trail. If most every woman you see on an image or a video screen or somebody or someone who is eager and wanting to have sex with you, after a few hundred or thousand or thousands of those videos, you start seeing women as more willing and available than what they really are in reality. That's a form of distortion that can settle in. So now when some girl smiles at you in the church and shows you some attention, which you're probably going to get as a pastor, then you start thinking, well, maybe she's really into me. I bet she would be willing to do something with me. I bet I could get her if I really wanted to. And I'm not saying I do, but gee, I wonder, if we could be a thing. It just distorts your reality. And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but most of porn takes regular forms of social engagement and it completely sexualizes it. So that office interaction, that physical massage, somebody cleaning your hotel room, a visit by the neighbor, you name it, common social situations, social interactions, and video after video, all of a sudden the situation turns wildly and spectacularly erotic and sexual. So where do those breadcrumbs go in your mind? You're helping somebody's in your office, somebody's at the church, somebody's cleaning whatever, you're there, whatever. And all of a sudden you start thinking in your mind, boy, this situation could turn interesting really quickly. The point is this: little bit over and over, a little bit at a time, your reality is being subtly distorted. You are now beginning to miss cues and you're reinterpreting things that are not there. And that can get you in trouble real quick. Now, some of you are going, I think you're being a little over the top here. I don't believe I am. Let me give you a couple spectacular examples, and then we'll try to bring this down to earth a little bit more. Here's a spectacular example from outside of the church world. Let's go to the football world, which right now is causing me a lot of pain and heartache. I just lost my quarterback for 6 to 8 weeks. But I will leave that alone. That's for therapy. But I recently did a football podcast. We kind of did a NFL preview podcast on Porn Free Radio, me and my buddy Matt Dobschutz. And it was all a bunch of friendly banter around how we thought our team was going to do, who we thought was going to win the Super Bowl. But we wanted to put in something that was at least a little engaging because it was called Porn Free Radio. So, the only topic of any seriousness we talked about Deshaun Watson, who was the quarterback of the Houston Texans. And he was accused by 22 women. Originally, it was just one, and then it became 22 women who accused him of unwanted sexual behavior in physical massage settings. And we're not talking one or two, we're talking 22 different women. And Deshaun Watson, they had an interview, and they've now, he lost a whole year. Then they've suspended him for another 11 games, I think. But even now, Deshaun Watson is saying things like, hey, I don't believe I did anything wrong. I didn't do anything that wasn't consensual. And you're going, how is it that some guy could have such a distorted view of reality? I mean, not one or two women, 22 different women. And he's going, in my mind, in my reality, these women were inviting it. These women were saying, please, I want you to show me sexual attention. And all these women were saying, no, we were not. That's what you call a disconnect. That's what you call somebody who has a distorted view of reality, somebody who is looking in a carnival mirror and seeing something different than what other people are. Okay, well, let's bring this down to the church world. And again, I don't know all the details. Deshaun hasn't called me up, and I'm not coaching him. I think I might charge him a little bit of money, more than I normally do if he does call. So Deshaun, just so you know, it's going to cost you a little bit more if you call me. But let's just talk about the church world. And again, let me be clear. I don't have all of the information, but I do know what I've seen and what I saw on the pastoral confession. And we all know the story of the well-known pastor. I mean, this guy's a world-class leader, world-class thinker, smart, intelligent guy who was having an online conversation with a woman in his congregation. Another woman sees it and goes, that is way off sides. That is completely inappropriate. Those messages go to the elders. The elders look at it and go, yes, this is completely inappropriate. This is completely over the line. And yet he is saying, again, world-class leader, world-class thinker, big staff. He's saying, I didn't see anything wrong in what I was saying and how I was communicating with that person. How is it that you can have a distorted view of reality where you, as a smart leader, are saying, I didn't think I was doing anything inappropriate, and everybody else around you is saying, this is very inappropriate? That is called a distortion of reality. Again, I don't know if there's porn involved. I don't know what the backstory is. All I'm referring to is and I watched what he said Sunday morning. All I'm referring to is the discrepancy between how he viewed the world and how everybody else around him viewed the world. That is a distortion of reality. So, is there a link between unwanted sexual behaviors, regular sustained porn use, and pastoral misconduct? I think there is. I think the breadcrumbs are there. And that's one of the reasons why I say to people is you don't know the degree of snapback. Eventually, reality will snap back at you. You can create your own distorted view of reality, but reality will snap back, and it will snap you painfully into reality. So this is part of why I do this podcast. If you think that this is not changing the way you're viewing the world around you, you are wrong. There's example after example of how this changes the way you see the world, the way you see others, and the way you interact with the world around you. So that's kind of a heavy way to get started. But as we get back into the Pastors on Porn podcast, but again, if you're in a place where you go, gee, that could be me. I don't know. I mean, you just told us that one of the opening things is we tend to lie to ourselves, and you just want to have a safe space to talk. You want to share a bit of your story, share a bit of your context. Please reach out to me. Again, my email is bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. So hope you have a great day, and I hope we get this fall off to a great start. God bless.